Okay, give me 1 minute and I'm going to get us live and then we'll be good to go. Okay, and you are live.
Okie dokie. This is Steve Dritz calling our May CSAC meeting. So with that, first thing I'll do is turn it over to Nick. He has a few words to say.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. So I know that most of the commission is aware by now, but we did find out recently that our 7th CSAC member, Gary Gasson, passed away on this past Saturday on May 8th. And I just wanted on behalf of the city to extend our condolences to his family, on behalf of the city manager and city council. I know they send those as well. And, I didn't have the opportunity to know Gary too well. I know he and his wife have long volunteered with the city and have always been very, very active. And I know many folks with the city know him much better than I, but he was just such an incredibly kind person and really patient on the commission and with me. So I really appreciate the time that we got to spend with him. And Steve, I know you wanted to say a few words, and if anybody else would like to chime in after Steve, I think that that would be absolutely appropriate.
Sure. Yeah. I had the opportunity to travel with Gary to Costa Rica as part of the Dublin Chamber of Commerce trip that they had. So, you really get to know someone when you're with them for like 9 days. It was a group of people, but, you get to interact with everyone. So he's quite a character. One thing I'll never forget about Gary, went to one of our stops was at a resort that had a swimming pool. I use a resort loosely, okay? It was at what they called a resort in Costa Rica. Anyway, he had he never wore it, but he hung out in his room a mankini, which is like a bikini for a guy. He always threatened to wear that mankini, but he never did. I believe also that he and I were in the same first class of Citizen U. I'm pretty sure. I know we were in one of those together. It was either Police Academy or Citizen U. So yeah, he'll deeply be missed. And anybody else have anything they'd like to say about Gary?
Yeah, just a quick one. Yeah, I mean, I saw him. I think the first time I saw him was like he came before he took over the position. He came as a public one day. I guess he was sitting on that day. That's what I was remembering him. So he has a very polite and nice guy. And fortunately, we couldn't meet very in person, during this commission much. But yes, hearty condolence to his family on behalf of me and my family too, and prayers for his family.
Yeah, thank you. Another thing I liked. Oh, Dee, you want something to say?
I was surprised at one of our last CSAC in-person meetings to see Gary sitting in the audience because I know Gary from the Dublin Citizen Police Academy. Gary got around. He was in the Alumni Association. I sit on the board, and he was absolutely delightful to work with in the Alumni Association. He had a great sense of humor. And he has a lot of friends in DCPA, and he'll be missed very much.
And for those of you that didn't know, Gary was an IT guy his entire, at least most of his career. Just FYI.
Well, I just met him briefly during our Zoom sessions here this year. I just was struck by his good nature. He's always smiling, and he was quick to find humor in anything that we discussed. I just he had a really positive impact on me in just a short time frame. So he certainly will be missed by me and our team. I know.
Before we get to business, somebody have anything else? Before we get to our business, I would like to, I found out something today that was really sad too, and I want to express my condolences to Marja. I did not realize until today that she lost her husband last month. So, Marja, You know, Bridget, I know you know Bridget, my wife too, and we're both very, very sorry about your loss. You're such a young guy too.
Thanks, Steve.
Sure. So with that, shall we go back to the agenda? Was there any public comments on items not on the agenda?
There were not.
So next item is approval of the meeting minutes of April 13th. Anybody have any comments? If not, is there a motion to approve them?
Approve, or motion to approve.
Okay, that's from Jim, second.
Second.
From D, all in favor, raise your hand. All opposed? Okay, they passed. So with that, we have a change in our agenda. It's supposed to be Christina Ardocchia, and Matt. And now Matt is our featured presenter. So I shall turn it over to Matt/Nick.
Yeah, thanks for the quick change. I really am happy to be here with the commission this evening. As we talked at the last meeting, and certainly other council meetings and committee meetings from council, well, we're in the process of figuring out the plan of updating the master plan, the Parks and Recreation master plan. And when we spoke last, I promised that I would bring forward basically some notes of where we are with all of the action steps and so forth. And before we get into this, I just want everybody to understand that when we review this is more of an informal, interactive conversation that I would like to have with this commission as one of the most initiating starting points, if you will. And the idea behind this is to understand the things that we did with this plan and figure out if the things that we are doing or have done are relevant today, continuing to be relevant. I think most of them will be. Whether things are irrelevant, some of them may be. But most importantly, as we go through each of these items, I think the most important thing for us to do to be able to make a recommendation to City Council on how to move forward, or to the Public Services Committee on how to move forward, we have to understand the scope of this update. So some of these items, I'd like to really think about diving deeper. Do we want to dive deeper on this topic as we go through these? When I mean diving deeper, does that mean, do we want to go back to the community and revisit this? Do we want to, create focus groups? Do we want consultant expert analysis? Do we want staff further research and analysis? There's so many components to this that could elevate the scope of the update to the point where it is going to require outside assistance for us to be able to get it done. I have a feeling that's where we're going to go, but this is the reason for us to have this conversation so we can measure that and bring some of those ideas forward for future consideration. So what I sent, or Nick sent to you, was a spreadsheet. I hope you were able to navigate through that spreadsheet. It includes the action steps, the deliverables, and so forth associated with each. And some of these will be very easy, I think, to go through very quickly, because some of these things will never change and should not change. And if they do, they should be modified, not completely redone. And others may take a while. We might want to get a little bit deeper into the discussion of what does this really mean? Have we really vetted this policy out based on what the master plan intended for it to do in the first place? And then, we can take these things one step at a time. I don't know how long this will take. I can't gauge that until we start looking into these things. So I guess what we'll do is we'll start off this evening with the conversation with each of these. I think the process that we'll go through will be fairly simple to understand. What I'm going to present to you this evening is basically what I sent to you before. So I'm hoping that none of this is the first time you're seeing it. And I'm hoping that you were able to read some of the additional comments in the master plan itself to help support some of these things, and hopefully you're familiar with it. Nonetheless, all questions are welcome. All conversation is welcome. This is your meeting. I'm here to deliver a topic and conversation. I'll be able to provide whatever support. But truly, I'd like to hear from you all on what your thoughts are on some of this, and I'm sure you have many. So with that, I'm going to share my screen, and we will get started with that. In the meantime, does anybody have any questions on preliminarily?
Matt?
Yeah.
So this is an amazing plan that has been put together. The many people were participating. Is it the consulting group, which I guess is currently what, the MKSK group? Are they the ones that sort of managed the process and came up with did some of the finishing touches on this plan? Is that the group that really was the big driver of it? Wasn't sure.
The driver of it was really Kinzelman Klein. They did the bulk of the facilitation of conversation and discussion. And, throughout that conversation, we took good notes. Then we, took all of that together and put the writings together to help, facilitate the final document. So it
So
was
they
a
turned
long
into-
process.
They evolved into that other group in Columbus. I just looked at their website, and it seems like they do a lot of our planning, like architectural planning for the Park Bridge area. Are they still actively involved with a lot of Dublin projects? We have a really good relationship with them?
Yeah, we've used them on quite a few of the larger projects. Some of, the line of work that they're in are they did the Scioto Mile downtown. They've done some really big things. And so when you're looking for the scope of the project, you're looking for that landscape architect firm that can truly deliver on that level. And they have been a big part of that. So Bridge Park was one of those, or I'm sorry, Riverside Crossing Park was one of those, as well as, we're renovating the North Pool today. They're involved in the landscape package associated with that plan as well.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay, everybody see my screen okay? Wonderful. Well, as the master plan is laid out, chapter 1 is obviously just an introduction, just kind of, giving a preface to, the community and what it's all about and how it's developed over time. I don't know if there's anything in that chapter that you truly want to go through. It all reflects history. So the difference between the introduction of that master plan and the update would be basically what's happened between then and now. And, is there anything that's been complementary to that introduction? So I'll open up the floor for if anybody wants to have that conversation about that, what that might look like.
Matt, this is Dee. I have a question about the demographics. The report is referencing data from 2009. Is there a plan to actually update those demographics? Things may have changed in the last few years.
Absolutely. In fact, we research the demographic changes periodically throughout the year or the years, from our planning department to, we use a lot of the school trends and some of the information they use for planning their schools and needed resources to accommodate that, that change as well. So there are periods of time that we do some periodic checks. Fortunately, now we just finished the 2020 census. That's going to give us a whole nother update of where we've been over the last 10 years since the 2010, 2009 census was done. So yes, absolutely. That's the key is, making sure that we're tapping into that information.
Hey, Matt, on the just one question on that first chapter. We have such amazing park space for population. The ratio is amazing, but there's just like a couple of different numbers in there. I just was curious. One area talked about that we have 371 open acres, and then the other area in that said 435. I know it's small potatoes, but I'm just curious. Is that all that'll be updated too, right? As we move forward on the acreage and all that good stuff.
Yeah, there's a significant increase in the number of acreage for parkland and just general open space. So yeah, that will all be updated as well. We have all of that information. it is interesting when you look at our statistics or our benchmarks or our, the metrics we use, when you compare them to the national average, the majority of them are significantly higher than most anywhere else in the country
Yeah, it's great.
That was actually
on a per capita basis, basically. Is there anything else about the introduction or the demographics chapter that we might be missing? Or, we've got a lot of changes in the cultural cultural awareness that, is around us today. And, we do capture ethnicity and so forth. And culture has become such an important criteria by which we design our recreational programming and our facilities, and it's enhanced over time. So it's something we're certainly paying attention to.
I think once you get demographics that are more current, you might see things in that chapter that would be altered by those changes. So I wouldn't discount looking at some things in there, but at the top of my head, I can't really think of anything specific.
Well, when it comes to analyzing demographics and how that is related to the field of parks and recreation, whether that's the recreational programming aspect, the inclusionary types of things we do for multiple cultures and certain disabilities and things of that nature, and then certainly the design of our parks, what elements go into those parks to satisfy, the overall needs of the community. We need to analyze that. And a lot of times those demographic changes and the results of those changes require someone who has that background to understand all of those national statistics, because they're always measuring these things. And you may have read this, where there's a lot of gender types of preferences and different types of participatory types of metrics in the master plan. All of that is part of, it's hard to generalize those things. Every community is different, but we take those and then we match them up with focus groups. And does this meet what we're looking for, or does it not? So those types of things would have to be an interactive conversation with the community.
Yeah, I agree with Dee on the demographic, especially from the age standpoint, because I think the report talked about the 65 and older seniors is a relatively small group of Dublin, but I think over the years that's expanding. So like you said, I guess once the new demographics come in, then that's our board that we can jump off of to look more specifically at what can be done to customize. Is that kind of thinking?
But yeah, if you look at his comments, he says it was updated in 2019.
Mm-hmm.
Graphics.
Yeah, I was just reading in this in the report, it seemed like the elder population or seniors was represented maybe 5%. I thought it was greater than that now, but maybe I'm mistaken.
Yeah, the implementation of the master plan, we looked at the demographics in 2019, but the language that's referring to what was back in 2008, 9, and 10 is based on the demographics of that year. So definitely things have changed, and we will need to take a look at a lot of that. If you think about aging in place, the program we have in place today, it was a derivative of the need that was defined. So we evolve very quickly with the needs of the community. So part of the problem here now is, okay, we know what we've done for the last 10 years to accommodate the changes in the demographics. The plan now is, where are we going and what are we missing out on tomorrow? That's the hard part about, these look aheads.
Yeah, Matt, like once a big, nice report like this is completed, it sort of is there, right? And everything changes dramatically over time. So your working document that you have here is probably much more specific and topical, right, to what we're doing, and it's just not reflected in that report, right?
Right, and you'll notice a lot of the stuff that's in here is development of a policy, development of a plan, inventory analysis, those types of things. We found that we were very far behind back in 2010 to have formal things in place that help us measure where we currently are. without the metrics, you have no story to tell. Without any story, you can't figure out where the end of the story should be or where the next chapter should go. So part of the 2010 plan was a development of those things that will set us up going forward. That was the design of it.
Will the end product be another report of this magnitude, or is it kind of be a work in progress and just updating?
I guess it depends on the scope, but I would anticipate that this would be an amended doc or amendment to the master plan. Looking however many years out we feel comfortable to look out. That's another question we have, though. That's a tough one. Because as I mentioned before, if we were to start this process in 2019, before the pandemic, by the time we got through the update, we'd have to start all over again, based on the changes we're living with today.
Yeah.
Anything else on demographics? I can move on. And by the way, we can always come back to some of these things. If you have further thought at a next meeting, we can always revisit, anything that came up in your thoughts, and whatever we end up with this conversation is certainly not an end all. I'll move at whatever pace you all would like to.
Hey, maybe I'm gonna get to the end here, but I was kind of curious. This document was 2009, right? Or released.
Yeah.
And in the summary page of your workbook, you have a nice little table summarizing quantitatively where you stand. I'm just surprised that some of these activities are still in progress 10 years later. It shows 15 activities in progress. And I haven't gone back to each one of them to see what they were, but I mean, that's just
some of the things that are on this document have not yet been updated. For instance, we have the, I think that there are about 90% of all of the action steps were completed. And I think about 10% of them have not been, or some of them were determined irrelevant, but some of them took just forever to get done. Some of these were very large projects and very political projects that involved multiple organizations or even city council and so forth. So, sometimes these master plans might achieve 60 to 70% of their lifespan. And the fact that we've actually reached the 90% mark is almost unheard of. A lot of people let these things sit on their shelves, and we didn't do that. We really took it and ran with it, and we ran pretty quickly. But some of those things are difficult when you're trying to do everyday jobs and the service levels that we're trying to achieve. And so yeah, there were something in the back burner for sure. For instance, the Art and Public Places Master Plan that was just recently approved, and that's not indicated on this as it might be now. But at the time, when you see the graphics of the percentage of completion, I think there were 11 items in there that we were able to click the complete button on.
okay. Well, since we're in generalities still, I haven't read the chapter 10 on community art that you just mentioned. I was surprised it was in this plan versus the Dublin Arts Council having their plan, and that being the master.
Well, that's really what this was designed to do, to steer the Dublin Arts Council, which is funded mostly by the city, so that we had a formal plan in place. And certainly they would be the driver of that, them being the experts of that, but certainly with our input.
Okay, that's all.
Okay, chapter 3 talks about organizational analysis from a variety of different perspectives. The first one was is very interesting because back when this was written, the Parks and Open Space Division at the time was completely separate from Recreation Services, which was completely separated from events, community outreach and engagement, and volunteer services. So when we had multiple divisions that weren't truly connected under one department, there was a lack of communication at times, or duplication of services, if you will. And in 2015, we decided to bring all of those under one umbrella. So one of the things that we did is that big change in 2015. Now, all along the way, we've made tweaks and things here and there to the organizational structure that have helped us be more efficient in what we do and make sure that we're all talking to each other to make sure we know what the other is doing. So that was one of the big changes that we made from an organizational structure, staffing organizational structure. Are you all getting feedback when I speak? I hear feedback from something.
I hear some.
A little bit, not much.
Is it, you can still understand me? Okay.
Yeah.
So our organizational structure is constantly under evaluation. As things change, as our needs change, our operations change, we're always looking at our operation. In fact, every time there is a vacancy in a position, we will reevaluate that position to see if there's a more efficient way to get that work accomplished by maybe doubling up some things or just realigning things all together. So that's always a work in progress.
Hey, I was curious, Matt, on the page 22 of the plan, it talked about a Parks and Recreation Commission, 10 people meeting for a term of 3 years. Did that sort of dissolve over time because of other committees, or do you have a history on that at all?
Yeah, we had the Community Services Advisory Commission, and then we had the Parks and Recreation Advisory Commission. And over time, City Council felt as though neither commission was really being asked to do meaningful things because it was a little bit watered down from, multiple perspectives. And they felt that it would be more valuable for commissioners to be on a committee that was doing a little bit more meaningful, higher scope types of work like we're doing here. And, at the time, I know, Steve, your wife was on Parks and Rec Advisory Commission for many years. And, while we tried to create some ideas of projects, there were times when, we felt like that's really what we were doing, is creating projects. And we felt like that was a disservice to the committee's time. And so we consolidated.
Thanks.
I don't remember what year that was, though. It was some time ago. Okay, another item in this chapter refers to the provision of recreation facilities and services and how they're provided for general recreation that will benefit large segments of the population. Without reading all of this, I will tell you that the philosophy of City Council's present is up to debate because they weren't part of the discussion here, but councils at the time this was being developed, the city's philosophy has always been to provide general basic recreational services, highly subsidized, to accommodate those large segments. In other words, if we have programs or resource usage that goes above that general recreation level, meaning a higher competition, I'll use soccer, for instance. I think I've used that before. If you can play in DSL in the recreation level, or you have a variety of other higher competitive types of options available to you. Well, the city's obligation at the time, its philosophy was that those kinds of resources would only be available to the general recreation. Now, it doesn't mean that we don't find those valuable, those other services to be of value in the community. So as additional resources were available, those too would be accommodated, but at a less subsidized rate. So there are fees associated with the secondary and tertiary levels of those types of things. So this was a big deal for us because, as you all know, during or with youth sports in general, there is a very high desire for competitive sports, and people feel very passionate about that. Some kids feel very passionate about that. So this is one of those areas where, are we truly serving the needs of the community, or is our philosophy still the same? Is it different? This might be one of those things where the general desire has shifted, and we might need to go back out to the community and talk to the community about what those provisions are. Mind you, you can't just do that in a vacuum without the need for additional resources, whether that be land masses and fields. But it certainly takes a lot more when you started expanding these programs that are already very enormous. So that's one of those things that we have struggled with over the years, to try to accommodate everybody as best we can with the balance under the philosophies that this plan has provided. The other thing to think about here too is, we've got these items in here where I'll just say lacrosse in general, but lacrosse was using field space that they no longer have. They were using behind the school administration building, the old administration building, and they lost the use of those fields. So we had to pick up the balance and try to find a place for them to play, because that is considered a general recreation program. Cricket is another sport, albeit more adult than children, but it's a growing sport. It's a growing popular sport in Dublin and around this whole area. And we need to expand our field space if we're going to accommodate everybody that wants to play cricket. We can't have them teaching kids how to play. We can't have camps and things because the fields just aren't large enough to do that. So this is a catch-22. We do have continual conversations about these needs, and we relate them to what we might want to look at in the future. We certainly use it from a political standpoint to try to get things in a balance, but it's been a challenge over the years. So this statement in this master plan has truly been something that has enabled us to get this thing under wraps, at least for now, or at least until 2010, and who knows where we are now. Any thoughts or comment or questions on that? How do you all feel about taking this as one of those things that we need to dive deeper into through either focus groups or surveys, or, if you ask the soccer groups what they want, they're going to tell you they want this. If you ask, the non-soccer groups, if they want more soccer fields, they're going to say no. So these types of questions need to be balanced on a general consensus across the city, which can be done by citywide surveys. So we have to be very careful about how we extract that information.
Matt, are you seeing any decreases in any of these?
No, we do trend analysis on the number of kids playing recreational soccer to middle tier soccer to the higher elevations, to the elite groups. The model that we are desiring to have looks like a triangle, with recreation being the largest group on the bottom, and then the middle tier, and then the elite. And we pretty much don't have a triangle. We have more of a rectangle. So, it's the same pool of kids, though. If you think about, are we adding total number of players? No. What we're seeing is there's a creep going on where people are wanting to play in that upper echelon. So they're moving from the recreation programs into those more elite programs. And generally, they might be growing a little bit as we get more and more development in the community. My biggest concern is, we do accommodate Dublin School District residents on our sports field. So all of the development you're seeing out on the Northwest is Dublin School District. So we have to work very closely with our municipal partners and make sure that we're working with them to make sure they're providing the facilities that all of these kids will need, not just Dublin.
Hey,
And
Matt.
this one might be, you know, let's identify the need community-wide. It doesn't mean Dublin builds or provides the resource, but we identify a need that we need to get a little bit more creative on the planning front, whether that's partnership development from our contiguous municipalities or even further out from that. Maybe it's, you know, larger types of sports complex that could really come into play from multiple jurisdictions, combining resources, but at a lower level than if they did it themselves. So this is one of those that has been, I'll just say, my first 10 years here with the city, I spent probably 60% of my time dealing with this. So it is quite an animal, and nobody has been able to figure it out. I think we've come the closest thus far, just being able to have this statement. So I think that's something we probably need to put on the list, but I'll defer that to your thoughts on that. And
Well, this is one of the biggest challenges. It's probably something that we ought to take a look at.
well, we can certainly add it to the list of notes. And I think what we'll do at the end of our conversation is put together the minutes of these meetings and categorize things on here with some executive summary to the thoughts associated with it, and then, you know, talk a little bit about, you know, what does this all mean. So I won't put that all on the commission to do, and we'll work together on developing.
Hey, Matt,
Yes, sir.
can you hear me okay?
I can.
Okay. Question, something that's never been clear to me is, you have like a Dublin soccer league. Like, what's the relationship of these external entities and the city? And how many of these entities exist?
All sports
Well, just
or
yeah.
just soccer?
Oh, no, I was saying across the spectrum of who
All youth sports.
rec has to deal with.
So we've got Dublin Soccer League, who is I'll just say the parent of soccer, and then we've got the subsets of those at the higher levels with Club Ohio, Ohio Premier, and Dublin United. So there are 4 soccer entities that we work with, and we've got Dublin Youth Athletics. They are fairly autonomous in managing their own programs. The difference between the two is that DYA, Dublin Youth Athletics, has done a really good job in limiting how many outside types of programs can come in and become a higher competitive program. They have their own. And if I were to build it all over again from the beginning, you would have one provider that controlled all of the branches of competitive play and set parameters around those, so you don't have that, you know, that crazy politics and competition. We've got organizations working against each other rather than for each other, so it creates that competitiveness. And so anyway, so Dublin Youth Athletics, they do almost every other sport there is, from golf to volleyball to lacrosse to basketball, baseball, softball, that kind of thing.
Okay.
And then we've got cricket. There are 2 cricket clubs that play in Dublin. One of them is the Columbus Cricket Club, who started back in 2006, and the latest one is playing out at Derry. They are the Dublin Cricket Club. So we've got 2 cricket clubs that are accommodating mostly Dublin residents to play cricket. Then when you got Dublin Football League, who we do very little with, they're pretty autonomous. They work mostly with the schools and use their resources, field space and the like. Occasionally we will get involved to help them out or provide space for them, but they're pretty much on their own. And now you're going to have a new pickleball club.
Okay.
Actually, it's Dublin Pickleball Association.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Matt, again, this spreadsheet's amazing, tracking all this. And you go into next, and your request for us to be looking at it from the standpoint, is it relevant or irrelevant? Should we continue, update? I mean, everything seems relevant to me. And updating is just really what you're focusing in on to continue to improve. I was just curious in this section here, looking at benchmarking against like some of the European playgrounds that seem to have, like, I've read 50% greater activity level, and they have a more sort of, you're probably familiar with them, much more of a rougher feel to them. I mean, there's tree climbing and moving log, just different things that tend to be not that accepted in the United States, but their safety profile is lower than ours. I just was curious if there was, efforts around that. I know down in Louisville, they've got a program down there. You may be aware of it, where they've got 3 different areas, and they're very hands-on and very unique and innovative as far as getting people involved with the kids and such. I just was curious about that for benchmarking.
Yeah, when it comes to playground design, there are so many restrictions, safety guidelines, and requirements for that matter. You probably know this already, but we have to have certified playground inspectors inspect our playgrounds, and we inspect them once a week. And our staff, several of our staff, are certified playground inspectors. I mean, this program or this certification requires a week's worth of training. And so it is very intensive and takes quite a bit of time to get that on board. But we want to be the ones inspecting our own playgrounds. We don't want to rely on an outside source. But anyway, so some of the limitations have been more along the lines of falling, what kinds of materials are used, those kinds of things. But to your point, there's so many new types of playground ideas out there using technology and otherwise that really interact with kids. And there's even stuff out there now that adults can interact with their kids and just to have just as much fun and get the exercise and and interact with their guardian, their parent, their brother, their sister, whatever. So there's a lot of new stuff out there for sure that we are looking into. A lot of that is we're looking at creating different looks and feels to our playground. It's not just a flat surface anymore. It's more of a mounding type of surface, that kind of thing that creates sliding areas that are natural and things of that nature. So yeah, we struggle with that only just because we want it to be safe first. And that's on our priority.
Yeah.
So one of the other items on this chapter talks about the park system aging and as new trends appear, to your point, Tim, and being prepared to abandon an asset. This is one of those areas where we're still in progress because we're using technology to be able to do this. We're using a combination of our GIS system that we know exactly where these items are. You can go out to the field, you can click on the item, you can update the item, it tracks it for you. We can run a report off of that. We know exactly what the issues with the certain asset are, and know when the warranty wears out. We know, how frequently it might be used or not used, and we can keep track of all of that to plan out our 5-year capital improvement program in a more efficient manner, because we have so many assets out there. I think I mentioned before, to your point with playgrounds, we have over $12 million worth of playgrounds in the city, and 43 of them that we're trying to keep track of. And if you get behind on the replacement, it can be really expensive very quickly. So this is behind. mainly because it was so intensive before we had the ability to use the technology to get it done. And so we're building this now. We have it's not just Parks and Recreation asset, it's an entire city asset management. And we're able to track all of our assets a little bit more efficiently using technology. So it's taken us a while to get there.
Matt, have you had a situation to date since this went in place that you've had to repurpose something because it wasn't being used?
Um, Off the top of my head, I can't think of anything. You know, in Dublin, you build it, they will come. I mean, we have a very active and engaged community, and that makes our job fun. It makes it difficult, but it makes it fun because things do get used quite frequently. So yeah, I don't know that we've really taken something down because somebody's not using it, but case in point, you know, our neighborhood parks, they'll typically have a playground or they'll have a shelter house or tennis court or whatever. And as we all know, when those were put in, the age of that neighborhood was one thing, and then over time it turns over and it suddenly now is in a different need category. So we will take things and modify them, but I can't think. I mean, we didn't just take something out without putting something in its place, identifying that we needed to upgrade it. But that's a good question. I'll have to stump the park operations director, see if he knows.
Hey, Matt, I can tell you that I live on Wiltshire, and at Wiltshire and I believe Tullymore, there was kind of an interesting playground that my children played at when they were younger. And I noticed it's totally being reworked, and there's, you know, construction around it. So all the neighbors around here who've moved in since and have little ones are very excited to get a new playground in their area. So I know that I can firsthand look down the street and see Dublin hard at work to make a new and interesting playground for the neighborhood.
Yeah, we'll actually go out and seek input from that neighborhood. I don't know if you were a part of that, but we will go into the neighborhood.
I think you know, it's an amazing gift to have all of these neighborhood playgrounds so readily available. And if you walk the path, sometimes you stumble upon one and think, well, this is lovely. Where did this come from? And it's kind of magical in that. So you know, we can't complain because Dublin treats all of us very well with the playgrounds.
Well, we're going to start building some adult playgrounds. We have to think of a different name for them, but yeah, there's a lot of neat stuff out there for parents and older folks. There's a ton of stuff out there. We're going to try some of that.
Hey, Matt, to the question Dee had, over where we have Wellington Place Park. It's wonderful over there. But one thing that's been sort of there for the last few years and sort of untouched is a tetherball pole. Did the city decide that tetherballs would be either stolen or would be dangerous for kids to play because there's never that extra piece there that allows you to play? I just was curious.
I would question whether we actually put that in there.
Yeah, maybe it was there before. Well, it was there. It's right part of the basketball. Like there's two halves of the basketball court, and then right there is the pole and the diagram, you know, where you would be able to play, as I recall. I mean, I haven't looked at that closely last few months, but anyway, I was just kind of curious whether maybe they decided it just wasn't necessary for the park there. So
yeah, I don't know, and maybe nobody's playing it because there's nothing to use it. I'll look into that. That's an interesting question.
Hey Matt, I think you brought up the cricket club because I'm not involved in that once anyway. But anyway, my question is, like, I know when you're doing a repurposing some of the stuff, but right now, you know, the cricket playground they were using right now is like a baseball playground, right? So most probably, I guess. But was there any request from the people to make it like a cricket playground? Or has anything happened, or did they never brought it up at all?
I know they use the baseball fields on occasion for practice, but you know, at Emerald Fields, we actually have a pitch out in the middle of the lacrosse fields. And we installed a pitch down in Dari Fields as well. Neither of
okay.
those are perfect facilities, but I think they have the ground space that they need to accommodate play. I'm trying to consider, or working on trying to do a better job down at Dari Fields. The problem is we need 2 more feet of soil on top of what's down there to get it out of the water. So that's quite an undertaking. But
Probably I didn't visit that place. Which one you said, the Derby one? The
Dari
Derby?
Fields, yeah,
Derby Fields, okay.
yeah, it's you know where the community gardens are in the dog park?
No, I visited a long time back. I haven't visited
Okay.
anything recently.
It's in the
Probably I
southwest
should
corner.
visit
It's
sometime.
just a wide open field down there.
Okay. Because one of the thing I don't know, like any maybe the future business is coming up. So, you know, cricket is crazy on the other side of the world. And, you know, we don't have any good facility to conduct international level type of play I believe in the United States at least. So that's something that we can think about for future.
You know, I think that's a subject that we should probably dive deeper into in a general sense, because just like cricket, you know, there are others out there that want us to build 40 new pickleball courts to accommodate world tournaments for pickleball. There are others who have requested a bank of approximately 30 tennis courts to accommodate, you know, at least regional tournaments for tennis. And then there's soccer, and then there's baseball, and then so everybody wants to have these international tournaments. Well, if we put all these international tournaments in the city of Dublin, we'd be on gridlock traffic wise pretty much year round, which, you know, that's one of those things that we have to find the balance, and what is the need. You know, this is one of those things where if we're looking on the scale of what you're talking about here, one of the things that I bring up to city council and others for consideration is, you know, between here and Marysville, we've got all of this wide open farmland that's waiting to be developed, and it will be developed one day. And once it is developed, it'll be, you know, it won't be affordable. This is, I think, an opportunity. If there is that need out there, if multiple municipalities are seeing that same need, we need to start working together to secure that property in order to accommodate these types of things. But you know, there's only a limited number of resources and a little bit limited number of land space out there. So, you know, and I tell everybody that asks, if the city wanted me to build the world-class cricket complex to host the world tournament, I'd be all about it and have fun doing it. But you know, unfortunately that's not my job. My job is to make sure the city identifies the need and then challenges me to figure it out. So I understand your passion.
This is something to bring more money to the city. So who knows, like 2050 Olympic is going to be in Columbus. So then we may have to develop more that at the time, right? So.
Right. Yeah. Well, if we build something like that, we're going to need more hotels too.
Right.
I remember, Matt, back when I coached DYA baseball for many years, and when they had the 14-year-old baseball World Series tournament out of Avery, it always kind of played havoc in the schedule for a couple of weeks over there in the summer. So it was a kind of bittersweet. We enjoyed the top play, but also impacted our schedules. So I can see what you mean. It kind of works both ways.
Yeah, it certainly does. All right, moving on to the next item in this chapter, talks about development of performance measurements, using metrics to be able to have a qualitative analysis done on the things that are important to making sure that we're achieving what we're trying to achieve. Each one of our divisions has a set of these metrics, whether it's in our park operations group or public service group, you know, have you all been privy to the Go Dublin app? I'm sure. The Go Dublin app is a huge resource for us to gauge what needs to be done out there, but we can also run reports and figure out how much turnaround time it took us to complete the project and what priority was it, and are we hitting on the marks that, you know, is expected of the community from that standpoint. That's one element that we use. In recreation services, we use a lot of our evaluation tools for all of our programming. We survey our members. We certainly look at our revenue base for recreation services. As you may or may not know, our city council requires that recreation recover 50%, at least 50% of its cost, its direct costs in aggregate. So that is quite a feat for running 1,200 different programs in 4 different facilities, and, you know, having all of those moving parts to be able to track all of that. And every single one of our programs has a business model, has a financial model, has an expectation outcome, and we can run reports on all of those things. So we, not just from a how did you like the program type of thing, did it meet your objectives, but we can also gauge those on our financial responsibilities to make sure that we are overall being able to track that 50% cost recovery requirement. And then certainly our events looks at visitation numbers, weather, revenue, sales, those types of statistics. And then volunteer outreach and engagement, they measure a lot of the, not just the number of volunteers, but the number of programs that we have for volunteers and the saturation rate of each of those programs to make sure that we've got what we need to get those things done. Christine, as you know, does an amazing job making sure that those volunteer opportunities are meaningful. You know, we don't just hire help, and she just wants to make sure that we're, you know, meeting that mark and providing people the meaningful experiences people sign up for. So all of those things are measured. There are many more things that we do measure. In fact, we provide briefs to the city manager. We have stopped doing it since COVID. We're reevaluating our metrics and using this time to figure out where we're going from here from a measurement standpoint. But we'll meet with the city manager, and each one of us will present pretty much once a month and provide him those metrics. And it tells us our story of, you know, are we succeeding? Are we winning, basically? So we haven't always been good at that, but we've certainly come a long way since, you know, this plan was written. I always want to ask people, particularly in the Citizen U, for any of you that have been through that, you know, what statistic or what metric would be important to you as a resident who doesn't necessarily know what we do for a living to help tell our story? I often want to hear that from people to gauge where, because we think we know, but, you know, we're measuring our own performance based on our own goals set by us, set by the city manager or city council. So you know, it's one of those things where I'm always interested. So if you have an idea, please let me know. This last one has to do with our budget and how we, yes, sir.
Could I just ask a question on this last one? Relative to land acquisition, does Dublin kind of look at properties that, for instance, even like a private citizen might have a big piece of property and they think, what, you know, Dublin needs more land for recreation? Do you proactively go after something like that, or how does that actually work as far as land acquisition? Do people come to you for donation of their land? I was just curious.
Yeah, there's a chapter dedicated to this exact topic, but to answer your question, it's both ways. We have people that approach us and say, hey, we want to sell this property and we'd rather go to parkland than we would have it be developed. Ferris Wright is an example, a good example of that, where the family of that property wanted the city to make sure that it protected the use of that land. So the deed dictates what we can and can't do out there to a certain extent. Most of it's making sure it's preservation and interpretation and helping people be educated on the history of that property. So, we have that happens, and then we actively go out and actively keep eyes on land that's for sale. Or, you'll see some of our master plans for parks, for instance, that will basically outline pieces of property that we don't own yet. And people can see that. Riverside Crossing is a perfect example of that. On the west side of the river, people can see that we have a master plan of these parcels becoming parkland. And when they know the city's interested in that land, they'll come to us and say, would you like to buy it for $10 million an acre? So, yeah, but every time I will say that almost every year, if not more frequently, we will meet with city council or city manager or development director will meet with city council and executive session and go through the inventory of parcels that are our land that's out there that staff is interested in for one reason or another, whether that's economic development, whether that's parkland, whether that's some kind of a recreational amenity, that kind of thing. So, yeah, we've got our radars open on most all of them. But, when we do go seek property, we buy, I believe it's charter. I have to look that up, but we'll get the appraised value of a piece of property, and we won't go much above that appraised value because we are a public entity and we have to be the stewards of taxpayers' dollars, just like everybody else has to live within their own budget. So there's quite a process to it, and it's mostly offline. It's mostly in-person conversations and behind the scenes things. So.
Interesting. Thanks.
Hey, Matt.
Yes, sir.
Back to number 4. Can you share? I haven't gone through your appendices in this master plan, but can you share the Parks and Rec metrics with us at the next meeting?
I'm trying to think of when they were developed last. It was probably 2019 because then we hit into the COVID world of things, and we've shifted gears a little bit. But yeah, I can bring a sample of that so you can take a look at it.
Well, don't you update them on a yearly basis and then measure yourself against them?
Yeah, but when we brief with the city manager, we have them all included into a slide deck, if you will. So I would have to go out and get each of those, and I can do that. I just don't know. For instance, when COVID hit, we shut down things. So there's going to be some blank lines in those metrics that we weren't able to open the rec center for months. And then when we did, we have fewer members. We have all of these things shifting around. And, while we might be keeping track of them, it may not be in a form that we're able to present it. But I can provide you with a sample of each of the division's metrics that, that we typically will take a look at.
Okay.
I can either send those out before the next meeting or run through them at the next meeting at your pleasure.
Well, I think it's always good to have them before the meeting. But let me ask an ignorant question or something I'm confused on the master plan. The master plan, I realized like 2009, then you did all these updates or all these actions. Why hasn't the master plan been kept evergreen? I.e., if you came up with metrics in the section where it says develop metrics, why wouldn't you have just said the metrics are and replace that section? Why? I guess I just don't understand why it wasn't evergreen, this document, versus not, I guess, what we're trying to do now.
Make sure I understand your question. Are you saying that, why didn't we just identify what metrics we needed to establish?
Using it as an example, that's just one example, because I looked at the text and it says, the action items have developed metrics, okay, within chapter 3.
Right.
So now according to this action plan, you have metrics developed. I'm assuming that's correct.
Right.
So why didn't you guys, I'm just using this as one example, why didn't you guys just evergreen the master plan and say, once a year we'll update it with what's been updated from the prior release? And therefore, if you now have, for example, metrics, why wasn't the document just updated and say, instead of develop metrics, the document say, in the master plan, our metrics are? You see what I'm saying? I mean, why can't, you guys have done a lot of actions in the past 10 years. Why just wasn't this document evergreen? I call the word evergreen, just kept updated.
Well, I guess, the way we were thinking back in 2010 was that that's what this document, this spreadsheet was put together for, is to track what we were doing as a way of updating the information that the plan called for. Because at the time when we developed the plan, we didn't know what we wanted to measure. We had ideas of what that are. And in fact, what we measured in 2019 before COVID might be different now. We might want to measure something else now. So those things are fluid as well. I see your point where why didn't we just update the plan itself?
Yeah, as
Yep.
things are done, like once a year, have a control system, a version control system in place, send update pages out, or, say replace page 3 with this new 3, and then, the new 3 would have what has changed. Now, I understand, what you're doing here. I just wasn't sure why it just didn't flow right back into keeping the master plan more up to date.
Well, I see your point. I think by and large, it was the enormous amount of work that took place to get these things, action steps actually worked on, and then to have to go back and update the plan in the process of doing that. We have so many people with so many moving parts moving on so many of these things. I don't know if we would have ever had the time to be able to say, okay, let's update the master plan based on what we accomplished this year.
Right.
I just think it would have been very cumbersome for us to do. It might be something we want to integrate going forward, because who says the master plan can't be a more of a living, breathing document that we can update a lot easier than what we had in the first place, because this was not necessarily this was an old-fashioned bound document. It certainly was digital, but it sat on our shelves just like every other book we have for a while. And so I see your point. I like the idea. We have learned so much from the virtual world. One of the things that we do one of the reasons we do track this is not just to keep track of it, but I mentioned that we went through our reaccreditation back in April. We had a site visit. I don't know if you knew this or not, but the site visitors went through all 154 standards and felt that we met or exceeded every single one of them. And that's usually not happening. So it doesn't mean we're doing everything perfectly, but it means that we're doing things in a fashion that it is under the best practices. I like your idea. I just think the way we had this set up back then wasn't thought of as tracking it as we go, other than this spreadsheet that we developed to make sure we were doing it.
Okay.
I think it's a good suggestion going forward. This last item on here is about budget sharing. This was back when we had a fairly antiquated system that really didn't allow us to communicate budgets. We had buckets of funds that were shared by multiple work units or multiple supervisors or whomever was overseeing their budget. And it was very difficult to track who was using what of those allocated funds. And, every year we would try to sift through that. We've developed systems since then to be able to track all of those things through, individual spreadsheets and PO tracking and all of that. But we finally got more sophisticated, and now we're using Munis Financial System that, tracks everything for us, and it will run reports for every single account we have and it will list all of the purchase orders that have been encumbered by that account, who did it, and you can run it by, by division and so forth. So we've separated a lot of our accounts out so they're more line item rather than budget sharing. So this was a big cleanup for us, especially when we have to fulfill the 50% cost recovery. We have to know where the money is being spent. We have to know why we have money left over at the end of the year, why we don't have money left over at the end of the year. And, now that we can track all of that, we have up to date. I can push a button in one day and get a report that tells me exactly where we are. We've come a long way to get there. You can't just change your financial system and software overnight. It's a work in progress for the most part.
And prior to COVID, how likely were you to recover that 50% or more prior to COVID?
I'm sorry, you were breaking up. What's the question?
Prior to COVID, what was the likelihood that your department would recover the 50% or more?
We have recovered 50% or more for the past, ever since this was put in place back in the 90s, back in the 2000s. The problem is either we're really good or we're really lucky if you're not tracking it to this degree. So we have changed our business model. I mean, every program we run has a minimum number of participants and a maximum number of participants. And right in the middle of that is a financial target. And, if you don't have the number of participants, we have to reevaluate whether you're going to run that program or not, because then we have to find out a way that we're going to increase that dollar amount. So 1,200 programs, that's quite a feat.
When you say 1,200 programs, is that like looking at the rec center booklet? I mean, each one of those in there, is that a program or?
On an annual basis, we will provide over 1,200 different programs every year. So yeah, it's the booklets. It's all 3 booklets combined.
So that's part of it, like those, offering like Pickleball 101. So that's a program.
Right.
I'm just curious.
Okay.
And
moving on.
in this chapter, the last sheet was the org chart. I think it was the last sheet. Is that org chart still relevant, or is that changed?
Oh gosh, no. Like I was mentioning earlier, we've run that through the ringer about 8 times since then. The org chart that's in there doesn't include a huge percentage of staff. We've got in the entire department, we have 80 full-time employees and about 500 and some part-time seasonals that don't get included on the org chart just because you wouldn't be able to read it.
Right.
So it's more or less baked so that you can kind of just see segments and work units and so forth.
Okay.
Parks and natural resource inventory. This is another one where performance measurements, analyzing the park inventory, utilizing the open space ordinance to accomplish the future designated or desired land acquisition is necessary, that type of thing. As you know, we've got with every new development, there's a requirement for 25% of the land mass to be open space. So if they can't reach that, then they have to pay the difference that goes into the park land acquisition fund and enables us to buy land down the road in another area. Same thing with, our trees that they were, have to cut down for development. They have to replace the same caliper number of trees in their place. And if they can't do that, they replenish our tree fund, our tree replacement program. So we have many things in place that keep us fluent in the ability to purchase property and make sure we understand what our natural resources are throughout the city. As I mentioned, I think I mentioned this last time we spoke, a lot of our strategies have been to create these wildlife corridors and greenways and waterways and make sure that we're preserving those. So making sure we inventory those and making sure that we are analyzing them so that any new development that comes in, what does that do to that ecosystem? What does it do to that natural resource? What effects does it have? Is it providing the right number of, or the right amount or number of parks, the types of parks, that type of thing? So, you know, we really take things into account as a whole. I mean, when you're a 25, 26 square mile community with 62 parks in it, you know, I would reason to say that you're probably hitting whatever mark you from that. But there are these nuances between, just because we have open space doesn't mean it's quality, doesn't mean that, you know, we couldn't have done something different to better preserve, you know, our waterways, our stream beds and things of that nature. So it's constantly under monitoring from our planning department. We're always involved in these developments and taking a look at them as well. So this is another area here, Tim, that kind of demonstrates, you know, we take our land acquisition wish list to city council for consideration. And don't get me wrong, they have a wish list of their own. So we're just combining everybody's wish list. And, you know, we talk about what those needs are. And quite frankly, our community satisfaction surveys have continually come back saying we need to acquire land along the Scioto River for access and recreation and preservation, and we've done that. And you know, those are some of those parcels that we're paying heavy and close attention to because they are identified as one of those needs from the community. So there's an example of, you know, how that works. Anything else on that chapter? Okay, let's see here. Seem to have lost my, there we go. This is about the recreation policy, or I'm sorry, just recreation in general. And one of the policies is that it called for is, you know, develop a division-wide marketing plan for recreation. And, you know, we didn't have really a plan. We would use our brochure as our primary marketing tool. Back in 2010, we were far less using social media platforms such as Nextdoor and targeting certain neighborhoods with information. People weren't signing up yet for, you know, if they wanted to be included on email updates and things of that nature. We were just in a whole different world, you know, when this was created. And, you know, so we came up with some marketing strategies and put a plan together. And you know, I can certainly forward you that policy if you'd like to take a look at it at some point. But, you know, it's a full blown, you know, type of, you know, we went through some branding things. In fact, we're going to talk to the city manager on, what day is it? Thursday, about, you know, the rebranding of the Abbey Theater, for instance, and, you know, putting together a new marketing plan for that facility. It just needs to be rethought, revisioned, rebranded, and so forth. So that was conducted, I think, in 2019. Or it was completed in 2000. It didn't take us 1 year to do it. It took us many months to do that. Division must design and administer comprehensive evaluative processes to chart success related to community expectations, division-wide goals, program area objectives, and individual success. There's a mouthful for you. And this, you know, when we went through this, we had some evaluative process is in place, but today every single program we run has an evaluative process, whether it's digital, handwritten, however, so that we know, for instance, every single program goes through a rigorous development model. If the best way to explain it is if you can imagine a brick wall, and each one of these bricks in that wall are a component of the program. It might include, is your program consistent with the master plan? Is it identified as a community need? Does it meet city council goals? These fundamental things down at the very bottom. And then it worked its way up into, do we have the resources to do it? Is there a budget? Is it going to meet the financial recovery rate? All of these things. Then we go into the implementation, the evaluation, and then we start all over again. And we develop this system so that everything that we do when we develop these programs, I always tell the staff that, consider it a brick wall. And if your program has a weak brick in it, your objective is to make that brick stronger so that your program is fulfilling more of what is needed in the community or what we set out to do. In amongst that process, at the end of the cycle of running that program, we reevaluate that program based on that model. That's the internal evaluation of that program to make sure it's meeting our goals, but it also makes sure it meets the goals of the participants and the overall objectives of the program of why we ran it in the first place. So it's a pretty well-rounded system that, it's very cyclical. And, it's used against other programs where we might want to replace these programs with. If there's something else out there and, this isn't quite meeting the goal that we expected it to do, we'll pull another one in that's a higher trend at the time and see if we can't get a better return on whatever it is we're trying to invest.
Matt?
Yes.
I can speak from firsthand experience in that a couple of years ago, I picked up playing harmonica, and I approached the senior center at the Dublin Rec Center to conduct some classes for seniors. And the amount of work that took place, the process that you just kind of outlined to get to the final where we actually had classes and participants, it's quite extensive, as you said, and it really kind of separates out what might be nice to have versus what really is needed. So I just wanted to kind of reinforce what you were saying there.
Yeah, appreciate that. It's good to hear that feedback. In fact, we have a matrix that goes through a variety of different evaluations. What type of program are we offering, from different age groups to different social skills, developmental skills, whatever that program is designed to do. And we put X's on that matrix. And after the matrix is completed, you can actually see where our voids are in the things that we're not accommodating, what might be the needs of the community. So, we go to pretty great lengths to make sure that, we're covering all the bases, which is why we have 1,200 programs. But when you've got a community that's engaged as Dublin is, and people want and do participate, it certainly, rings home to the justification for making that accommodation.
Well, the one thing I wonder about as far as this plan, and that is there a way for outreach to seniors who have skills in certain areas, such as maybe an excellent guitar player or someone who's an expert in fly fishing or something, to kind of reach out to them and let them know that, hey, if you want to share your abilities with other seniors here in Dublin, you have an opportunity to do that. We'll help you through the process. I'm not sure if there's a process like that out there.
That's a really interesting concept. I like that, because I think that does a lot of things. One, it satisfies probably a smaller niche of people. It allows for one person to interact and engage with another, to learn from each other, and you create that network of friends and sense of community, which is, when you boil down why we do what we do, that's why we do it, and suddenly now you've got this camaraderie, and maybe this person can then reciprocate with something they know. and setting up that network. I like that idea.
Well, you know, with the harmonica, it was interesting you mentioned that because I got really close to the group. We had probably 12 in each class each semester, and we actually had jam sessions over the senior center just on our own there. We usually had about 8 or 9 folks that would come up every 2 weeks. So it was a real camaraderie, as you pointed out. So it's really a beneficent, and I can see that something could easily be done with the other kinds of musical instruments or other things.
All right, Jim, I'm signing you up.
This was pre-COVID. That's the only challenge.
You can't play a harmonica with a mask on. What's wrong?
It's tough.
Okay. So this one is somewhat of a spin-off from the one that's previous. And that is collecting all of that data, evaluative data, and running, you know, a report to understand what it all means. If there are areas where we need to change, it's going to identify that in that report. And we use that then to reestablish new goals going forward. And then, oops, this is very finicky. Sorry about that. Didn't want me to make you dizzy. Identifying and prioritizing specific needs of the community. You know, we've got multiple ways of doing that. You know, I mentioned the survey that we send out. We do, sorry, I can't see the top on there. So we do send out the biennial community survey. I think we're late on that because of COVID. We do that every 2 years to give us a benchmark of how we're performing. That's citywide, and we take every work unit and put it in there. And clarify the city's responsibility to render recreational services now and in the future. And this is back to clearly defining recreational sports. The call for drafting a city policy, consider the endorsement. And before all of this happened, and I mentioned earlier, and I'm not going to go into this because you're probably tired of me talking about it, but it's close to me. But you know, this gave us the ability to develop athletic field policies, field use policies, that each of these entities, to Steve, your question about how many people are out there using Dublin facilities, each one of them has to follow the field use policy, and they won't get a permit unless they do meet those policies to make sure that we're accommodating the right people.
I have a general question about policies. Is every one of those chapters actually has, I mean, each chapter ends with a series of policies that are defined. And just in relation to this, how do you regularly modify those policies, or how do you go about doing that? And do you need to update the master plan when you do? Because there are a lot of policies in there.
Yeah. Are you talking about the field use policy or the policy from the master plan itself?
Well, this one, I'm looking at this in relation to the document itself that literally spells out that you have to have, you want to develop policies for each of those chapters. And this is a chapter to me. And I'm just looking at this as you've got policies in place. You change them periodically. They're defined and there's some things in the master plan document that I wonder if you change those things or remove those policies, or if that's a necessary thing to do to a master plan document.
Yes, so this document was actually adopted and approved by City Council. So any changes that we might make to the policies that are in here would need to be a directive from City Council to waiver from that policy as it's written. Now, most of these policies are very general, and they're somewhat written flexibly. And so unless it's something that completely contradicts what city council wants. For instance, let's say Matt says, you know what, our field use policy, we're now going to give preferential treatment to the elite programs. I can't do that. That would require an act of council. In this case, updating this plan, going back to council for readoption would reset those policies to whatever they wanted them to be. Does that make sense?
I was trying to get at, do you actually update this plan when you make those kinds of changes? And that looks like this is the means to doing that.
That's right, to formalize it, yes. And, you know, there are things that we do administratively within this document, so long as we're consistent with the intent of the way it was written. And that goes to even our field use policies. I tend to put at the end of almost anything that is formally adopted by council that says something to the effect that the Parks and Recreation Director has the discretion to alter this or modify this policy so long as it's made within the intent of the policy. So it gives me some latitude to be able to do things regardless of whether city council had approved it or not. And I point that out to them. I don't do it as a, you know, a trick or anything. It's got to be a fluid document. You can't run by, you know, you can't get it right the first time out of the gate.
I was just looking at how do you actually document that and carry that through. So, I mean, if you had a major scope change, that would be much different than like a little tweak on the policy. I just wondered how you tracked it and whether or not it fed back to that master document. Sounds like it does.
Well, yeah, I hope it does, because I'd be in trouble if it didn't.
Well, it sounds like you also have a process to track those things too. So if there's a major change, you have to change that, and
Yes.
you have to do that.
Yeah, good question. So this next part of this chapter talks about the joint use agreements. We have so many joint use agreements, and the reason that was put in here was, you know, we did not have a system by which we were able to evaluate the contracts that we currently had in place. And, you know, each of these contracts is going to have a different set of responsibilities for each party. Each one is going to have a different term limit, all of these things. We need to track all of this, and we need to hold accountable the parties that are responsible for this partnership. So we have developed an overview of these things that give us tracking mechanisms to know when the contracts are about to expire well in advance, to give us time to reevaluate, is it meeting the intent and so forth. So we did not always have that, but now we have that. It strengthens us to make sure that, you know, we're getting out of these partnerships exactly what we went into them for. A lot of people don't realize, but many of our programs that we offer are actually contractors. They're not employees. We will contract a lot of our stuff out. It's more cost efficient. They are better equipped to accommodate it, and we don't have to find them the subject matter experts, and, you know, they're already there. And we usually enter into, you know, a 60-40 type of revenue split for those programs. It doesn't cost us anything to perform them, but yet we generate revenue off of it. And they like the agreement because they're getting free marketing for their own program and still taking 60% of the profit. So it works both ways very well. And those 60-40 splits can be different depending on the nature of the program. But, oh yeah, the two-tiered residency fee structure for the Dublin Rec Center. It is a challenge. It's not just two-tiered. It's multi-tiered. It's resident, non-resident, corporate resident, school district resident. And as we all know, everybody is challenged to actually know what jurisdiction they actually pay taxes to. So when people figure out that they're not truly in corporate Dublin and not paying taxes to Dublin, they're really mad at their real estate agent, and they're mad at us because somehow we bought their house for them. I don't know, but it's a challenge for us to meet that. So we tried to refine that and really get things into a little bit more of a simplified package. And we tried, but it really boiled down to what is the fairest way to do it based on you know, being a resident, having a relationship with the schools, because all these kids are friends. So there's got to be some kind of a discount there for school district. And then those that don't even reside or go to the schools in Dublin. So the one thing that we have changed a little bit, we do have a military membership. We've refined that or added that. And then we also have a corporate membership that if you are an employee of a corporation in Dublin, you actually get a discount because your income taxes are paying a fair share of, you know, the amenities that we have. It's not a full discount, but we've messed with that a little bit to try to open it up more for them so that they have more time and opportunities, because they're only limited on certain times of the day, which, you know, are usually the busiest times they can't come in, which is the only time they can be there. So to be more fair to the corporations, we've modified that. This last one was on here because we have, I don't know if you know this, but we own the chiller over in Sports Ohio area. We actually own that property and that building, and we lease that to, you know, the company, the chiller company, and they operate it on a long-term lease. And the reason it's in here is because when this was written, that lease was going to be ending in 2018. So we had to figure out what we needed to do with that building and that lease, and were we going to keep it? Were we going to operate it? Were they going to keep them operating? We had a whole lot of things to evaluate. So we ultimately got that worked out. We had to put a temporary agreement in place to get it there, but we did sign another 30-year lease with them. So that's not on here, but we just got that signed, I think, last year. So a lot of people don't know that, and we also own the golf course of Dublin. I don't know if people knew that as well.
Well, maybe the chiller thing could be obsoleted.
What's that?
Maybe the chiller thing can actually be marked irrelevant.
Yeah, I mean, for this update, I think you're right. You know, it's not something we're going to ignore. We have to evaluate it, make sure they're abiding by their lead. But yeah, good point.
Hey, Matt, does that include the go-karts and the course over there as well, or is it just the facility there?
Yeah, it's just the chiller. Yeah, all those other buildings on campus around it are owned by Alan Shepard, but Sports Ohio. Okay, Mr. Chair, we are at 8 o'clock and we have made it through 5 chapters so far. Just want to do a check-in to see what your thoughts are on time and continuing.
Well, I'm good if we, you know, stop here. It's really not clear to me what our end game is. I gotta admit that. So maybe we could talk about that now. You know, I understand going through all the chapters, but then what?
Well, I guess really what I need to understand is, from your perspective, are there things in here that we're talking about that need to be revetted and reevaluated, and thinking about the community at large, and do we need to re-engage the community on these things in your perspective, and to what extent we need to do that? Is it something that we need to really think, well, that's going to be a big project to overcome or to take on? And, you know, a lot of this would be facilitated conversations by a consultant with the different, maybe it's focus groups, maybe it's organizations, the various stakeholders throughout the community, city council, this commission, having a more in-depth conversation, understand it. You know, maybe we get the information from the community and then take a look at it and say, wow, okay, so this is where the community is on this, but that's inconsistent with the plan. Is this something we probably need to add on to as a large scope part of the update? So that's really what I'm looking for each of these segments.
Okay. So in the month of June, what do you see us doing? Finishing 6 through 12?
Well, I would think we could either break it down into 2 more meetings or 1 more meeting. What is it, May? We don't meet in July, is that correct?
Typically, we don't meet July or August.
Okay.
Yeah, that's correct.
I mean, I guess we could if we wanted to, but
Well, the end game here is, the ultimate end game here is, I just want to understand the desire from this commission, from city council, to take this on from a full-blown redo and reevaluation. For instance, we can have a consultant come in and talk about each one of these things. They can run through this, facilitate conversation. And I know when we brought this up to council and or one of council's committees, there was a desire to have a consultant come in and really facilitate strong conversation about a lot of these things, to allow time for or input for me to engage, for our Parks and Recreation staff to engage, for you all to be there and really talk through it. And, you know, from those conversations, set up a strategy for how we would go about and secure that information and go forward with that update. So I don't want to be the one to tell council that, you know what, I need to hire a consultant. I want to get this done. Here's how I want to do it. This isn't my plan. This is the community's plan. So I want to make sure that wherever you all want to take this thing, you take it in that direction.
and when this plan was developed, and maybe it was in the earlier chapters, was there a vision on how long of a time period this was to cover, you know, to be the framework in which, you know, the Parks and Recs division would operate, or was there, or wasn't that thought out?
Yeah, this was built on a 10-year plan.
A 10-year, okay.
And I would be interested to hear from consultants who do this for a living. They have a very methodical process and a very good facilitation type of process that really weeds some of this stuff out. I'd really be interested to hear if they would be interested in a 10-year plan given today's environment.
Right.
Because I think you would probably want to whittle that down to probably half that. Just given technology alone, the differences in technology and what it's meant to this industry and society in general. For instance, you know, we talk about land acquisition here. We've got a process for land acquisition, but what we don't have now is, okay, so now that we have this process for land acquisition, we've labeled that. What are our needs in the community for land acquisition? I would argue that we need to start thinking a lot more clearly about what is remote working doing to the need for different types of parks, pocket parks. We need technology and connectivity in our parks. That's not currently in our plan. And, you know, that is something I would suggest that this community probably needs to think long and hard about. And, you know, it's not just those, but what is the desire for us to continue down the path of providing sports fields? Do we need those kind? There's so many things to enter into in the conversation of land acquisition. Oh, I know what I was going to say. Land acquisition. Are we looking at the future of fewer bricks and mortar and fewer office buildings? And what happens to all that land? We repurpose them? Do we what do we do with the parking lots? Do we create them, turn them back into open space? Do we make them naturalized because we won't need the cars that we need today, especially with autonomous cars? The vision out there, the projection out there is so crazy about what the future is looking like. And, I'd like to gauge where we're trying to aim for rather than taking a look at where we are and, is it where we need to be? This needs to be thinking forward. So there's one example of, one of the chapters in here that you could dive really deep onto that topic, just looking at the trends and the projections and, the finding people that really understand the technological world and what those impacts are going to look like. We're repurposing our recreation to a virtual world. How do we do that? Do we do it with our existing resources, or do we need additional resources to be able to bring the e-programming or the virtual programming world into what we do? Are we going to continue to have mass gathering spaces? What does that look like? What are people trending towards? So there's just a whole host of things with that. What this plan shows today and what we need to think about going forward. I think there are a lot of those deep dives in here that we probably need an expert consultant and/or expert facilitator to walk us through what that looks like and engage the community in a manner that gets us the answers we need.
So relative to the first 4 chapters, 2 through 5, were there any areas that were identified as deep dive areas?
Well, I think why don't I do this? I enjoyed the conversation, the questions and discussion. Between now and the next meeting, let me take a stab at reading the minutes and evaluating these and make some suggestions on those areas that might be deep dives, and be a little clearer on thinking forward and what those deep dives might need to include to take us into a different frame of mind as to where we're trying to go with this.
Okay.
Does that help? Would that help everybody?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
I think it's also useful to go through this so that we understand the base, how it started and how it was developed.
Yeah, I can tell you I've got my own thoughts on where we should probably look into the future on a lot of this stuff, but those are only my thoughts, and I don't want to be but I think I do owe it to everybody in the community to provide my expert opinion. So it's a starting point. You may not agree with me, which is fine, but that's part of my responsibility too, is to make recommendations and provide thoughts. So I'd be happy to do that.
It helps to understand what we started with in order to get an idea of what it needs to change going forward.
Yeah.
Maybe that's just me, because I'm not that familiar with Parks and Rec, and other people in this group are. I think that I actually am getting something out of this. I'm getting a better understanding of what we're started with and what our intentions were and how we have been effective. We have done a lot of the stuff that's in this. But take that understanding and then move it another 10 years out or another 20 years out.
Well, I kind of see this document, if it got updated, to me, this would be your foundation of where we're at today. And maybe the approach has to be you, Matt, and whoever some of these, your experts on your team or others outside. If we agree on what the future state is, maybe the next master plan is getting from this foundation to the future state.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm just throwing it out. I'm just internally brainstorming what we're going to be, how to.
Well, I think you're right. I think that's the right path. And just so you know, we're not in a hurry to get through this. I certainly want to put funding into the 2022 operating budget. I can do that with just a general sense of where we probably need to go with it before we even know where that is. It would be a placeholder of funding to be able to get us to where we need to go. That being said, here's another thing that's not in this plan. Since our reorganization, we have established a whole new work unit called community engagement. That's under Christine. It's not just volunteer services anymore. Community engagement is a huge component of where things need to go for the future, and a lot of that is around mental illness, addiction, substance abuse, COVID, mental states of mind, the need to connect the right people to the right places. And it's not necessarily a nursing home doing that anymore. It's the entire community. We need to connect all of the dots in the community and provide people the resources to find out what their need is. And that's exactly what we're doing today. And there's going to be a huge need of that going forward until the end of time, in my opinion. It's too confusing to navigate the waters as, you know, an aging adult trying to understand where all your resources are if you don't know where to start. And, you know, we've done a good job of that to a certain extent. Patty Ranella, I don't know if you remember Patty. She was a very good reference, but, you know, we were trying to do it all ourselves. And now, you know, we are just making sure that we can connect the dots with everybody and get people to the right resources. That's something that we need to start aiming for even further, developing those partnerships with those entities. So that's another example of what's not in this plan, but it's certainly something we need to think forward. So to your point, Steve, the reason I bring that up is, yes, the directors and staff that are in the experts of each of their respective disciplines, I would love for them to be in this conversation, you know, and I can pick their brain before we get that deep and just talk to them about what are your thoughts on this subject, is, you know, in your field. And, you know, it's not all about what I know, but we've got a team of people that certainly do. So I can provide that.
But you mentioned community engagement. Is that part of your team, or is that just another group you work with?
Yes, that's under Parks and Recreation.
You know, I think what would also be helpful, and maybe you did this, I might have missed it. Like maybe our next meeting, you know, just an overview, high level overview of, you know, what you guys measure, and then an org chart of, you know, high level, like what's all underneath, what do we consider to be Parks and Rec, our resources, you know, like by function. So I didn't know Christine is part of your team, for example.
Yeah, we can do that. We can we have those types of descriptions and so forth that, you know, we can send out.
Yeah, well, okay, yeah, just something very high level, you know, because all I have right now is just that. I haven't gone to the Dublin website, but just that picture that's in the book says, here's the org chart, which you said isn't true anymore.
Well, for the sake of planning of time going forward, why don't I offer this up as a suggestion? Certainly your call, but, you know, if you want to, you know, knowing where we're going to go with this next step, do you want to go through and get the foundation overview of what we just kind of went through here? And we can move quicker through 6 through 12 at the next meeting. That'll give me 2 months to prepare for us to really take deeper dives into looking where we're going in the future, or some of the ideas going forward, and how big of a scope does that look. We can do that in September. Does that sound reasonable?
Yeah.
And some of it too, some of the things going forward aren't, I mean, we've been looking at traditional Parks and Rec things like sports and stuff like that, but the other chapters include other aspects of community life.
Yeah.
And I think it would be useful to go all the way through all those 12 chapters before, you know, now to set a foundation for us.
Absolutely. And I think we'll probably identify some chapters that we need to add to your point, Dee.
Okay. So I have, I mean, all that sounds good. So next month we'll do the 6 to 12. A brief update on the metrics and a brief update on the org chart.
I'm sorry, you were breaking up there, Steve. I just want to make sure I captured that.
For next month, we'll go through 6 to 12 through those chapters, and we'll review metrics at a very high level and the org chart at a high level.
Okay.
Because the metrics are what you're trying to accomplish, right? Or measuring what you're accomplishing, and the org chart is the resources to get it done.
Right.
I mean, it's more of the foundation type stuff.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
Okay. Very good. I have, well, should we close off this topic in our agenda then?
Could I just want to make one comment too, and that is, it's really wonderful going through this. And correct me if I'm wrong, Matt, but is our goal, maybe we're already there, but if they do national surveys, would the goal be that Dublin has the very best parks and recreation in the country? And if that's the case, that's great. If not, would we be benchmarking against others across the nation to try to figure out where the gap is? Is that one step you envision as we move forward?
That's a possibility. I will tell you that the National Recreation Parks Association made an attempt to gather as much information as they could on each community and all of their, measurements and so forth. ICMA did the same thing in trying to benchmark community against community. It is almost impossible to compare apples to apples. Because there are the difference between indoor facilities, outdoor facilities. What size soccer field are you referring to? Are you talking about a 110,000 square foot rec center or a 60,000 square foot rec center? Do you program it for keeping teens off the street, or do you program it for fitness? Do you have aquatics? There's so many things about their questions that you have more questions about their question than you have answers for their question. So that's a really tough one. I struggled all the way through trying to get that, comparison. NRPA's got some decent metrics out there that, you can look at on their website. They show them out there, and we've got our own metrics as well that you can compare to. So as soon as we show ours to you, you can certainly compare those to other communities. They've probably got them out there as well. It's just hard to do. It's just, I think it's easier for us to say in Dublin, as long as we like and feel as though we've got the best parks and recreation system, then we do.
Okay. I was just looking at our trying to open up my meeting minutes from April. Nick, there was something assigned to you about notifying us about the I'm sorry, my word is not working right now. It was about like the mobility study that the I can't think of their name, the commission or the committee is doing, the committee on city council. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I do. I'll send that out as a follow-up to this
Okay.
group.
I can't
Yeah.
open up that document.
Yep, I'll share it with you all, and then if you have any questions, please feel free to follow up with me as well.
Okay, thank you. I apologize. I don't know why my word's not working. And any other items of interest?
Steve, I will just plug one item for you all to be thinking about. At the next meeting, you will have the opportunity to decide or vote for your chair and vice chair again. So, just to keep that on the horizon for you all. That will be decided at the next meeting.
Probably should have this right before Matt talks next week after the meeting minute approval.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes, that is correct. Yeah. So it'll be right at the beginning of the meeting.
Okay, sounds great. Thank you for bringing that up. I appreciate that.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay, any other items of interest? If not, our next meeting is on June 8th, and this meeting is adjourned. Hey, it's 8:30 exactly according to my laptop. Hey, that's pretty good.
Y'all have a nice night.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
for your
Thank
time.
you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, have a good weekend.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.